is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
We won this election on democratic principle, and we want to make sure we continue in that line. And there will be a complete reform of all democratic processes in this country. And I think if we get that, the field will be labeled for everybody. And in truth and reconciliation, if people reconcile, that will unite everybody. And we want to on that line.
With Adama Barrow sworn in for a second time, this time on home soil, the Gambia is finally beginning its radical shift away from former President Yahya Jammeh's isolationist policies. The small West African nation will not be severing links with the International Criminal Court after all, and will also be restoring its ties with the Commonwealth. But what's happened in the Gambia needs to be understood within the wider context of the ECOWAS intervention that forced a reluctant Jammeh out of power. ECOWAS appears increasingly unapologetic about its interventionist policy, cutting a distinctly different path from other regional organizations in Africa. So what more lies ahead for the Gambia under its new leader? And has ECOWAS set a new precedent for democracy in West Africa? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. A victory for democracy. That is how many described Adama Barrow's ascension to the Gambian presidency. But it hasn't been an easy road for the country. His predecessor Yahya Jammeh refused to step down after almost 23 years in power, which nearly brought the country to the brink of civil war. CGTN Susan Mungeli tells us how we got to this point.
The man who said he'll rule for 1 billion years. But he'll have to deal with a mere 22. Yahya Jammeh has been a fixture of Gambia's political landscape for decades. Until now, that is. Gambia went to the polls in December 2016. There, Jammeh was defeated. Initially, the long-ruling president conceded defeat, and many in Gambia breathed a sigh of relief that unrest was avoided. Then it emerged that Adama Barrow and his opposition planned to prosecute Jammeh for what they referred to as years of human rights abuses. Jammeh called the election results into question and refused to budge. Regional body ECOWAS sent in West African leaders to try and mediate the political impasse. Those included Nigeria's Muhammadu Buhari and Liberia's Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And the world watched as the political impasse dragged on. Gambia may be Africa's smallest country, but it has strategic importance. And with the threat of terrorism in the region, West Africa could ill afford a crisis on different fronts. Adama Barrow, meanwhile, left Gambia for the Senegalese capital, Dakar. There, he went ahead with the planned inauguration, a low-key affair on foreign soil. Back home, tensions grew. But it wasn't until ECOWAS sent in West African soldiers that Jammeh agreed to step down. The ECOWAS troops were welcomed by cheering Gambians, and Jammeh got on a plane to Equatorial Guinea to go into exile. The foreign troops secured the capital, Banjul, paving the way for Adama Barrow's return. Barrow has been described as humble and industrious, and it's now time for him to put those qualities to use for the Gambian people. Susan Mungeli, CGTN.
And now to offer further analysis into the Gambia's future prospects, I have expert guests standing by in Lagos, public and social affairs commentator Liborius Oshoma, and in Johannesburg, Richard Shellin. He's a project coordinator at Good Governance Africa. Thank you both for joining in this conversation. Liborius Oshoma in Lagos, to start off with you first. Gambia has a new leader after almost 23 years of Yahya Jammeh. Now, it has been rather interesting there, an interesting development starting from the election itself, the former president conceding defeat. What are your thoughts? What's your impression of what's happened in the Gambia?
My impression, first and foremost, is that the ECOWAS needed to do what they had to do. And ECOWAS' goal of economic self-sufficiency for its members cannot be achieved with insecurity. And so if it takes ECOWAS, coming into Gambia to enforce the will of the people, it was necessary. And we all advocated, for ECOWAS to do that. And I was happy that they eventually did that and was able to negotiate, Yahya Jammeh out of office, and then Adama Barrow eventually sworn in. And it's kudos to ECOWAS, and then kudos for the ECOWAS and the economic West African integration and enhancement of his economic programs.
Right. Richard Schelling, your impression?
I believe it was a really a very good effort on the part of ECOWAS to enforce the rule of law. After that, Adama Barrow won the elections, democratically won the elections, and it was up to ECOWAS to demonstrate the will of the people and to enforce that, setting a precedence not only for the region but also for other regional economic communities to follow suit in way to enforce the rule of democratic and good governance on the continent.
Right. Laborious Oshoma, though, this was rather a unique development in the Gambia itself because incumbent African leaders tend not to lose elections, though. This was a rather interesting scenario in itself. Oh, what is it, though, that led to the losing of Yahya Jammeh in this case?
It didn't just start in Gambia. It started in Ghana, and then it came down to Nigeria, and then Gambia thereafter, before also in Ghana. So it's a trend in West Africa, really, where you see incumbent president losing election, and then also the emphasis on transparent and credible election. And so it was also interesting that West African leaders were beginning to embrace democracy and democratic practice, and which a transparent election represented. And also it shows that the people truly were tired of Jammeh and his antics. Nobody expected Jammeh to lose that election, but the will of the people at the end of the day was allowed to prevail, and then truly they opted for Adama Barrow. And when it was obvious that the people didn't want Jammeh wanted to stay put, but ECOWAS had to do what they had to do. And,
Richard,
now peace had been restored to the country.
Richard, are we seeing democratization now taking roots, particularly given the circumstances that we have seen in that West African scenario with, as Labora says, with Ghana, with Senegal, prior to that with Goodluck Jonathan in Nigeria as well?
Yeah. In addition to what I guess I've previously said, I would also like to add the example of Burkina Faso as well, where we saw when the youth finally came to the polls and elected, democratically elected. And we see the same thing in the Gambia, an example of how the youth, how Adama Barrow managed to get civil society together and to also get the support of the youth. And that lays a great precedence that democracy, we cannot aim for democracy and good governance without the support of the youth. And that's one of the major disadvantages or impediments in other African countries, is that politicians can hardly connect with the youth. But we've seen that in the case of Burkina Faso and also now in the Gambia, that they have come on board and instill with the idea of democracy and good governance, and tired of the long reign of Yahya Jammeh, and finally voted for Adama Barrow and elected a new democratic leader, which starts a new era for the Gambia.
Right. Laborious, your statement there, is this just a public relations international stunt? Where does this leave the Gambia? Because several other countries have made intent their need and their willingness to leave the ICC.
Adama Barrow is charting a new course by saying, first and foremost, that look, I would want to join ICC, and then also it shows that he wants to be transparent. He has nothing to hide, because leaders that are opting out truly have one question or the other to answer. And so that also will elevate, his political profile in terms of international politics, and also charting a new course for regional integration in Africa.
Richard, we have seen, of course, Adama Barrow already saying that the Gambia will not opt out of the International Criminal Court, that they are going to rejoin the Commonwealth. In terms of that radical policy shift, though, what are you expecting?
Well, it's quite a break. I mean, at a time where many of the African countries, not only outside of ECOWAS, are coming together to pull out of the ICC, it comes as a very going against the tide. But as our previous guest just mentioned, it's showing that Adama Barrow wants to break away from the Yahya Jammeh's policies and create a new legacy for himself, to implement more governance, good governance in his country, but also on the continent, but also show the world that despite the size of the Gambia, it can still be and a good example, a shining example of good governance, of how democracy should take root. And one step towards that is to break away from Yahya Jammeh's concept of leaving the ICC, but rather to join the ICC, to join in that movement, to recognize that despite its shortcomings, the ICC has made some evident progress. So it's good to see such support coming from Adama Barrow, coming in from a position where he's from. So I would say it looks good in that perspective.
Well, Richard, the continent is quite adamant that most African countries do actually want to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. So this statement by President Adama Barrow, though, where does that leave the Gambia?
Well, it leaves it in quite a position of being able to gain the support of the international community, because there was a huge outcry from the UN and from other organizations that were quite distraught at the thought that many African countries wanting to leave, many powerhouses. But it leaves the Gambia in a good position, I would say, to create good relationships with not only other states, but also with the international community as well.
Well, Boris, do you think, though, that President Adama Barrow's willingness to rejoin the ICC or not to break away from the ICC, do you think he wants perhaps to take Yahya Jammeh to the ICC?
Yes, I also would envisage that he would want to do that, because mind you, there are a lot of allegations of abuse against Yahya Jammeh, because Yahya Jammeh was almost ran Gambia almost like a dictator, and so he would not. These are issues he ordinarily would not want to, allowed to be swept under the carpet, and so one of such program would be to take him before, the ICC. And then also in taking Yahya Jammeh before the ICC, also it's an opportunity for him also to live above board. That's Adama Barrow now, to live above board, because he also should remember that someday when he leaves office, the leader that comes after him, would also want to do the same thing if there are allegations of abuses against him. And so I really don't see anything wrong in taking Yahya Jammeh before the ICC if there are, substantiated evidence of abuse, substantial abuse against him. I don't see anything wrong with it.
We leave it there, like Boris, for the moment. We are going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll take a closer look at ECOWAS's role in both the Gambia and the West African region. To stay with us.
There is no time set for ECOWAS stay in the Gambia. They are here to help the process. And I think anytime we don't need them to continue in this country, we will work that out so that their services will please in this country.
That was the new Gambian President Adama Barrow speaking of ECOWAS's continued presence in the West African nation. Welcome back to Talk Africa. And we continue our discussion now, and I still have my expert guest standing by. In Lagos, public and social affairs commentator Liborius Oshoma, and in Johannesburg, Richard Sherlin, project coordinator at Good Governance Africa. Liborius Oshoma, just going back to President Adama Barrow and the challenges he's likely to face moving forward in the Gambia now, because the Gambia has no economy at the moment to speak of. And of course, there were indications previously that a lot of money may have been siphoned out during the last moments of Yahya Jammeh. Do you think President Adama Barrow is going to have a lot of challenges running the country, given as well his background of not having been involved in political governance?
Yes, first and foremost, he's going to have challenges in terms of finances because there has been massive corruption and looting of the treasury, even alleged to it, under the former administration led by Yahya Jammeh. But in terms of political experience, I don't think he would have challenges there, because it is not that of a problem, much of a problem, what the people want, and then how they want to be governed, and then also how to relate with neighboring countries like Senegal and the rest. That won't be a big problem for him. And then also, from what we can see, ECOWAS is truly ready to assist, and pursue his policy of collective self-sufficiency in Gambia. But he would need to find a way of recovering, some of the looted funds from Jammeh and his allied, so that he will have enough funds to work with. And so that's why also I'm happy for him, wanting to join the ICC back, and so find a way of also prosecuting Jammeh in the ICC.
Richard, and that is the whole question as well, in terms of trying to recover siphoned out funds or looted funds, as Liborius Oshoma talks about there. Where do incoming governments, though, where can they turn to in that situation?
Well, looking at the current situation, it's quite a huge challenge for Adama Barrow and his new government that's coming in. Where they may turn to, as a previous guest just mentioned, ECOWAS has definitely will definitely be a form of assistance to them, to Adama Barrow and his government. But also they have to find legal ways to recover the funds, and that will be one of the main challenges ahead. And also with Adama Barrow trying to re-establish ties with the international community, and I would say the World Bank, the IMF, and the guys like this would be open to negotiate terms and to be open to provide some funds to the new government, seeing that Adama Barrow has been a democratically elected leader, and he's quite open to opportunities in the Gambia for others. But one of the main challenges would be to recover the funds from Yahya Jammeh and the means to do that.
Liborius, you have both spoken about the work of ECOWAS there, particularly in the West African region, though, but there are similar problems in other regional economic communities, South Sudan, Libya, Burundi, just to name a few. What is it that makes the ECOWAS approach rather different from the other regional economic communities?
Yeah, ECOWAS is different because this policy of non-interference in sovereign nations' affairs, ECOWAS' approach to non-interference is slightly different, because ECOWAS would, if need be, introduce them or boots or ground soldiers, to find a way of quelling insecurity. And some people call it interference, though. But the reasons for doing that is the fact that if you don't have, you cannot pursue economic and regional integration or economic integration if you cannot achieve or pursue peace in such countries. And so ECOWAS would go all out to finding a way of ensuring that the country is peaceful, so that business can thrive. And so that's what's one major, reasons, one major departure, where ECOWAS departs from the other regional communities, and so which also had worked, seriously. Taking a look at Ivory Coast, Liberia, you know, and some other countries. And so the Gambia recently in 2017, and then, you know, at the end of the day, they were able to achieve, not for the force used by ECOWAS. I doubt if they would have been able to achieve the peace that they are enjoying in the Gambia today.
Richard.
So that's one major area where ECOWAS is, you know, largely different from other.
Richard, is that the way to go, having ground soldiers by other regional economic communities, given the examples that I have given, South Sudan still in turmoil, Libya still in turmoil?
In addition to what was previously said, yes, we see that ECOWAS has a sense of ownership in taking ownership of the regional peace and security issues in its region. And it's also, for ECOWAS, we've seen that constitutionalism and transfer of power is a priority over a sovereign state, because that's the biggest issue that we've seen. For example, if I may use the example of Burundi, one of the reasons why the AU had a standby force but did not actually engage in Burundi was all around the concept of sovereignty versus right to protect. And I think ECOWAS have shown that they really believe in a democratic transfer of power, and constitutionalism is quite very important to them. It's a priority over national sovereignty. And instability in a country, and they cannot attest by the fact that instability in a country would definitely result in instability in the region, and it's a chance that they cannot take. And also we've seen that other regional communities also suffer from financial constraints and some form of divisive politics. So ECOWAS have managed to take ownership of the peace and security issues, and also managed to combat any of those issues faced by other regional economic communities.
Richard, but do you think, though, that these regional economic communities should play a more proactive role, though, when it comes to conflict management in African conflicts, in those countries that you have talked about, for instance, Burundi, with the East African community?
Definitely, definitely. I would say that these regional communities need to take a page from ECOWAS's handbook and learn from the experiences of, as we've seen, I mean, it's not the first time where ECOWAS actually intervene in a country. The Gambia is the most recent one. We remember Cote d'Ivoire as well, enforcing the transfer of power to Alassane Ouattara. We've seen in Mali as well the intervention from ECOWAS in conjunction with the French forces. And I would say other regional communities would have a lot to learn from ECOWAS, and to really enforce, to really get. We also have to remember that ECOWAS have a protocol on democracy and good governance, which is in the aftermath of the mechanism for conflict prevention and management and resolution. And they actually have frameworks in place which can deal with such issues. And I think other regional communities would learn from having such established framework, so that it can further go beyond just mere talk and implementation, as ECOWAS has demonstrated.
Boris, just to get a brief comment from you, though, as we look at ECOWAS's role in the West African region, and looking at the way ECOWAS member states have contributed to trying to rout out Boko Haram, what can the East African community, the Horn of African region, though, what can they learn from ECOWAS when it comes to fighting groups like Al-Shabaab?
You also, apart from the East African, also the African Union largely need to learn a lot from ECOWAS in terms of maintaining peace and stability in the region. You see how, you know, ECOWAS came together to rout Boko Haram in the northeastern region in Nigeria, and that cooperation, that regional cooperation, had been able to achieve a lot. You put because it was an organization that had threatened the peace, the collective peace of ECOWAS also, you know, of countries in that region. And so if they didn't come together, you know, in that light to be able to you know, deal with the problem, that problem would have persisted and probably spread to all other, you know, countries. And, you know, but at that time, rather than, they would have been reacting rather than being proactive. And so you'll find out that You know, in the East African region, I think these are, you know, some salient qualities that they should learn from ECOWAS. It's not enough to say we would not want to interfere in the affairs of member nations, sovereign member nations. But when the problem, you know, dovetails into other areas, and then or there's piece of that region is threatened, and then also you remember the issue of humanitarian crisis and what do you call it? Spillover of refugees also. It's a big problem, and so it's better to be proactive and nip these problems in the bud like ECOWAS is doing. You just see how they averted a major crisis in Gambia, and then also you know, than wait for, you know, the problem to boil over, and then you now begin to talk about refugees and humanitarian crisis. Like, I think also not just the Eastern Africa, African Union largely should also borrow a leaf from this, because for some time the African Union have been more, you know, docile than, and you hear more of the regional, you know, group than the AU.
Well, Richard, Liborius has spoken about the role of the African Union in peace and security, and the new African Union Commission chair is from Chad, the ECOWAS region. Do you think he is going to have a different approach to Africa's conflicts now that he is from that part of the continent?
Yeah, he will. That's really an encouraging sign that he's from ECOWAS a regional bloc, and he will definitely have the support of his ECOWAS's partner. However, we have to remember that the African Union consists of leaders from 52 other African states. While he may have support in terms of ECOWAS partners, which consists of about 15 or so members of state, there are still another 30 odd members of state which we will have to convince in order to manage it. So in the long term, it's with what's have been going past us, with the history that's gone behind us, he might have a difficult time in trying to implement such right to intervention. However, I do believe that he does have the capacity and the capability to actually improve the conflict mechanism of the AU, which hopefully that will be one of his major agendas that he will address during his term in office.
Right, Richard Sherlin, we'll leave it there for the moment, and that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to my guests for their insights. In Lagos, Public and Social Affairs commentator Liborius Oshoma, and in Johannesburg, Richard Sherlin, a project coordinator at Good Governance Africa. And remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. And do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. Goodbye.